Well, hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Not sure where everyone's joining from. As we wait for Mandy to join, I thought we'd just start with some introductions. My name is Muna Hussani. I currently work at Indeed. I'm the chief of staff to the CTO. I've worked in the Muslim community and interfaith events for probably 2 decades now, and really excited to be doing this conversation informational session with y'all. And I hope we stay in conversation after this. I'll pass it to Sameena.
Hi, my name is Sameena Karmally. I'm an attorney here in Dallas-Fort Worth. I'm on the board, the advisory board of Kanarys, and I'm involved locally in the Dallas-Fort Worth Muslim Bar Association, as well as a few other nonprofit endeavors. I'll pass it to Muhammad.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Muhammad Abdul-Jami. I am from Texas. I currently do reside in Dallas, Texas. I got a bachelor's degree from the University of Texas at Austin in Islamic Studies back in the day, where I know some of these folks from. I have been very active in the North Texas Muslim community here for the past 12, 13 years or so. I have recently been elected to be the Imam of Masjid al-Islam in Dallas, Texas, which is the oldest Muslim community in North Texas, and very active in terms of its social services and community outreach work. And I'm excited about the opportunity today. Y'all gave me a reason to put on a button-up shirt, you know? So I'm excited about being a part of this panel.
Awesome. So, Stacy, I know you're on. Is Mandy still trying to join, or should we jump in?
Muna, I'm on.
There you are. Okay.
I apologize. I'm having a little bit of internet issues today, unfortunately, but I am glad that everyone was able to introduce themselves, hear from our so excited to have each of you with us. And let's just jump right in. I did want to just talk a little bit about Kanarys and kind of what we do, but we could do that at the end. So let's just jump right in and talk about how to best promote Muslim employees during Ramadan. So I am going to turn it over to Muhammad to talk about.
All right, sure. Thank you, Mandy. So just to give like kind of a baseline or basic overview for our audience, we're going to start off with the basics of what is Islam. And so generally Islam is comprised of what we call 5 pillars. And Ramadan, where the fasting takes place, is the 4th of those 5 pillars. When I'm talking about the 5 pillars, I'm talking about mainly 1, a declaration of faith, where Muslims declare that there is only one God, that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is his messenger. And the second pillar being that there's ritual prayers that are established 5 times a day, spread out throughout the day. Muslims are taking a time out from whatever they're doing to perform these prayers. A big part of the faith is giving charity. 2.5% of your wealth, not your income, but 2.5% of your wealth is you're obligated to give to those in need on an annual basis. And fasting in the month of Ramadan, which is going to be our focus today, Ramadan is significant for us as the holiest of months because this is a month we believe that the Prophet Muhammad received his mission of prophethood, where he received his first revelation of scripture from God through the angel Gabriel. The last pillar here is the pilgrimage to Mecca, which is obligatory for any Muslim who has the means and who has the ability in terms of their health to make it once in their lifetime. They're obligated to journey to Mecca to visit the oldest mosque or masjid. So in a nutshell, this is kind of the basics of what Islam is. It's important to note that Ramadan is a little bit different. Like we're typically used to doing the solar and calculating our months that way. In the Islamic tradition or culture, the months are actually calculated by the motion of the moon. And as a result of this, it doesn't line up with our calendar here. So like every year, it comes on about 2 weeks earlier. And another thing is it's an approximation of when it starts. So if you ask different Muslims when does Ramadan start, you might get 2 or 3 different start dates. The general expectation is we're expecting that this year is going to start April 23rd, but it might be the 24th. It might be the 25th, depending on who you ask. But that's a general approximation of when Ramadan is going to start. And so just to be aware, it's not a hard start date or a hard finish date. And during this month of Ramadan, the main focus on the Muslim is your fasting. And the way the Muslims fast is early in the morning, before the crack of dawn, we get up and we eat a meal. We don't eat or drink anything throughout the day until after the sun has set. So during that day, we're abstaining from food. We abstain from any kind of water, any nourishment. And we're also even abstaining from intimacy with our spouses. And the focus is on praying, on reflecting on our relationship with God, on reflecting on even our scripture. And so, in having just a different mindset of how can I refine myself and become a better Muslim or worshiper. We can go to the next slide. If you look at this, the people here in this slide, you'll see that they're very different. Even amongst our panel members, there's a lot of diversity in the Muslim faith. In other words, you can't just look at someone and say, oh yeah, they're a Muslim. So, and then on the other hand, there are some people who sometimes get confused for Muslims who are not Muslim. So between men and women, we have a sister here who's covered with a traditional headscarf, which generally is a giveaway, but not necessarily so. And so we just want you to be aware that there is no obvious look for a Muslim. We come in all different colors, ethnicities, different cultures, different foods, and it also even spills over into different interpretations of the faith. You know, so don't necessarily expect that any two Muslims are going to approach the faith or fasting in Ramadan the exact same way. We can move to the next slide. So what we have here is an approximation of a typical day in Ramadan. I'll say this is pre-COVID, you know, so this is kind of give you a baseline of how things normally have been. And so starting all the way to your far left at midnight, usually at that time, most of us are getting home from the Masjid or up late praying at home. During this time of year, you're getting up early, like I said, before the crack of dawn to eat something, preparing yourself for not eating for the rest of the day. So the day starts very early, earlier than usual for a lot of us during that time. So after that early morning meal, which is called here, it's labeled a suhoor, it's just breakfast at an unusually early time. Then you start to get into your work day. And then Muslims are particularly, I guess, timely or strict about making sure they're getting their prayers in on time, especially during Ramadan. You know, around noon or so, you could expect that there's a prayer break. I do want to point out that these prayer times, though, are going to vary depending on where your location is. And so this is just to kind of give us an idea of what a day might look like, but these are not specific times. So you can't say, hey, it's 12 o'clock. Aren't you looking for a prayer break? It's going to vary widely depending on their time zone and other factors. But there's times throughout the day where they're going to be praying, even when they get home from work. Then there's immediate kind of transitioning mode into, okay, when is the iftar or the fasting going to end today? What does that mean in terms of meal preparation? What does that mean in terms of also as they transition into the evening time, there's a lot more prayer. Now, typically, there's a lot of social activity for Muslims in Ramadan. Like prayers taking place at the Masjid, iftar may be taking place at the Masjid, or iftar may be taking place over at a friend's home, etc. So these are also different activities that increase the energy that is being expended by many Muslims during this month. So, like I said, this is what it looked like before the pandemic. We can go to the next slide. This is what it would look like now. Sameena, you want to take it?
Thank you, Muhammad. Yes, now that you have an idea of the basics, let's complicate things a bit more. Ramadan takes our universal work from home challenges that everyone's going through and magnifies them. So we have all the same usual home responsibilities, doing the laundry, getting the groceries, wiping down the groceries, cooking and cleaning, choosing safe takeout options, sanitizing, disinfecting, and we've added in childcare and homeschool. And as you know, some employees might be single parents without alternative care providers. They're already taking on a full day of childcare or online schooling. Additionally, Ramadan carries cultural expectations within the family. At home, when you haven't eaten all day, dinner is the focal point of the day when you get together with your family. And that's special and rewarding, but it's also extra work. Alternatively, if there's someone isolating at home away from their extended family and they're not able to go be with their family for the evening meal or go to the mosque that they're used to going to, then that can be a very lonely and isolating time for them. As Muhammad described, Ramadan requires physical, emotional, and spiritual attention. So while energy levels are dropping in the afternoon and hunger is setting in, the expectation in our norm is that as a human being, you turn spiritually inward because the distractions of the day are pushed out. Now, the distractions of the day are always with us. We have our kids, we have cranky teenagers, tired kids who also might be fasting, hungry spouses, and we can't get away from them and they can't get away from us. Additionally, many of us are in the sandwich generation, so we have elderly family members who also need support. So, for example, one thing that I have to worry about in Ramadan is that my elderly mom takes her daily medications before the sun rises when she gets up, and we're all groggy in the morning. It's easy to forget to do that. Things just require a lot more attention, and there's less attention to go around. So for the sandwich generation, we're feeling more sandwiched in than ever. And in the foreground of all of this, in the background and the foreground, is that work is still required. Deliverables are still due. So it's confining, and employees may not have space to really work from home effectively, and now they don't have time to rest. We can go to the next slide. So having learned this, if you're thinking, well, how do I help a Muslim employee who's in this situation? Now you understand that someone who is Muslim may not be sleeping their regular hours, may be abstaining from food and drink during the day, may be engaging in prayers during the night or early in the morning. And I say maybe because we have diversity within diversity. Everyone's practice is different. Some folks may not practice the rest of the year, but they make an extra effort in Ramadan. Some may be fasting and may not want to outwardly identify at work. We have a wide variety. In addition, employees will have different attitudes toward prayer and fasting, different practices, even day to day. We've gone over the basics of what fasting is, but we haven't discussed the dozens of exemptions and exceptions. Why, for example, I might be fasting one day, may not be fasting the next day, and may be fasting the day after that. These are personal exemptions. So I caution you against using your newfound Ramadan 101 knowledge to make any kind of assumptions when you go into the workplace. When the request for accommodation is made, don't question the practice that forms the basis of the request. And understand that employees may be hesitant to make a request at this time. They might fear retaliation or be uncomfortable making a special request when they know that all of their colleagues are also under stressful conditions right now. The best way to help is to emphasize to all employees that the company has an open door policy, make it clear who to address requests for religious accommodation to, make the company's non-discrimination policy known, non-retaliation policy known, and when a request is made, apply reasonable accommodations equally. So for example, you don't want to send out a company-wide email that singles out Muslims, even if it's for favorable treatment. And you don't want to approach individuals with assumptions about their culture or religion, even if you have good intentions in doing so. But by all means, if you know that your employee is Muslim and they've initiated a conversation about it, wish them a happy Ramadan. That's fine. What management basically should do and must do is make reasonable accommodations available for all employees, waiting for individuals to approach management with specific requests, and then engage in an interactive process to make reasonable accommodations that do not cause an undue burden to the company. Now, Mona will discuss more specifically policies that can help Muslim employees.
All right, thanks, Sameena. I was looking for real life examples of what support looks like, and I wanted to provide both of these. They're both sports related. I don't know if you can see, I'm kind of a sports fan myself. If anyone can recognize my background, put it into the chat and I'll give you a virtual high five. Tell me where I'm at. So back to the slide. On the left-hand side, I remember a couple of years ago, might have been last year, during the World Cup friendlies, Tunisia was playing a soccer game during the time that they have to break the fast. And the goalie fell down, little injury that was extended while his team ran to the sidelines to take a break and drink some water and eat some food really quickly. There's flopping in soccer and then there's flopping. This was a creative way to inside their own community help each other in spite of a game going on. On the right-hand side, this is an article about a high school football team in Michigan. This team is not 100% Muslim. They had a few folks of other backgrounds on the team, but it was summertime and they made the choice to move practices to the middle of the night. Some people may say, well, why not just do it in the evening? I don't know about you, but I can't run on a full stomach. I can't, do very much on a full stomach. And so they made this choice collectively. And I can imagine it was challenging for, parents of families that are not Muslim to let their kids leave the house so late to be practicing, but it's a decision they made together. And, from what I hear, there was a lot of bonding and camaraderie that came out of that. And just again, two real life examples of how different people have provided support and allyship. And this is a distinction, right? Support can come inside a community and then from outside a community as well. So wanted to call that out. We can go to the next slide. And so how do you support your Muslim colleagues? We're responsible for creating an environment where people can show up and do their best work. And that includes being productive, but it also includes their well-being, right? And if we're focused on building an inclusive culture, I think it's important to take both of those things into account so our employees can bring their full selves to work, right? I remember there's a study, you can Google it, but when it comes to daylight savings time, when we spring forward an hour and people only lose 1 hour of sleep, 24% jump in heart attacks in losing 1 hour of sleep. And on the other hand, when we fall back, there's a risk in heart attack drop by 21%. And so this is your employees losing sleep over the course of a month in a sustained environment where we're already in crisis, right? Stress levels are high. Some of us may be in industries where our employees are on the front lines. Some of us may not be on the front lines and have the luxury of working from home, but we may have family members who are on the front line. Maybe they're exposed, possibly bringing things back home. You know, Sameena mentioned we may have extended family we're caring for. Maybe some of us are working in communities where our apartments are tiny or our homes are tiny, and the ability to work from home and live and share space is very limited, right? So the stresses are high. When it comes to flexing, you know, you may have had your teams, okay, well, flex, work when you can. Maybe one colleague is working in the morning because that way they can trade off with their spouse or partner to take care of kids. We also have teams that are working across geographies, right? And so someone flexing in the morning might mean they're flexing at night when their colleague in Japan is awake, right? And so it's not as simple as saying, oh, just move everything to the evening or move everything to the morning. So it's just some background, right? And of course, everyone has a different benefits package, different offerings. And so, you know, if you do offer open PTO, can you encourage employees to take it? And how can you be creative when it comes to reducing hours or shifting hours and still allowing people to get paid? I know one team that I worked with, you know, their 40-hour work week was gone, you know, like years ago. And so during Ramadan, they allowed their employees to work what would be considered part-time hours, knowing that the rest of the year, not only is that time made up, it's made up significantly, right? You have to understand what your company's environment is and what you're able to provide legally and what is culturally also possible. And then as far as benefits go, in other countries that are Muslim majority, a lot of them give this time off completely. We may not be able to do that, but has your company even allowed for, you know, providing for holiday time? Do you have floating holidays? You know, these may not be things you can solve for right now, but start the conversation, you know, allow for that consideration and see what you can problem solve. We can go to the next slide. And I understand many of you on the phone are diversity, inclusion, belonging practitioners. You're responsible for HR and building inclusion, right? So we all know that it's a journey. Some people are starting, some people may have more maturity. And so if you do have an ERG or employee resource group, do you have any that are faith-based or where people can talk about spirituality or have a community focus? If you don't have them, consider starting them. And when it comes to the topic of faith, there are many conversations around, well, do I need to just have a Muslim ERG? If we do that, do I have to have one for each faith group? You know, you'll have to decide at your company whether the ERGs you have are for specific faiths, or maybe it's interfaith or shared spirituality. I know the group that Salesforce has allows for any practice to come and share. And then there's a group I know at Twilio where it's just a community focus and folks can come and share. And so there's different ways to leverage your ERGs to create community and allyship under that umbrella of practice. As far as engaging in conversations go, this again depends on what your practice and your culture allows at your company. You know, as Sameena mentioned, we don't want you to single out any employee, but you have to think about how you make these offerings and conversations available to everyone. And so in your onboarding material that you do for your new employees, how do you make folks available that like, hey, we have sensitivity training. These are some of the topics. Hey, we, you know, have different ERGs. These are the groups. Please opt in, right? So think about where those entry points are that you can make this information available to everyone. And then when it comes to your managers, we know that that's sort of your front line for where the rubber hits the road for your employees' engagement. How are you folding this training in for your managers? Number one is information, informing them. Number two is giving them a toolkit to say, okay, here's information. These are ways that you can have conversations. So you support your managers to have those conversations. And then the second part of conversations is that open door policy that Sameena talked about. How do employees feel comfortable sharing? You know, do they know who to go to from an HR perspective? Things like that. And lastly, Do you have volunteer opportunities for managers or employees to get involved in, and have a mechanism for providing feedback that is accessible and available to everyone? To provide some specific examples, I know that at Facebook, one year that I was talking to a friend there, they put gift bags together for everyone. I don't know if you can do that in this environment, but they, had an employee resource group that was set up. They had employees identified. In another case, I know at PayPal, we held an iftar that was company-wide that folks could come to, by location. You have to figure out what is doable for you at your company. And maybe it's just hosting an info session that you invite people to, which is easily or more easily doable. I did see in the comments, I will plug, hopefully it's okay, Mandy, I didn't ask about this, but Maha, who is a credible source from our community and ING organization, she's provided some free resources there. It is really important to get credible resources that Muslims themselves agree with using, and don't just go out on the internet and read and believe everything you read. And so that's why I wanted to pop that as a resource, Mandy, because that is a credible resource. But otherwise, if we just go to the next slide, I'll close by just saying that just starting the conversation has tremendous value. I posted that we were going to do this session yesterday on my LinkedIn. Mandy, I don't know if you know, it's less than 24 hours. I think I've had 9,000 views on my post. And it's been shared from my post that I can see 34 times. And that was, I checked like an hour or two ago. In less than 24 hours, I personally had, I think at least 5 people I don't know message me saying, wow, I didn't know things like this were done. I didn't realize people were trying to help Muslims have these conversations at work. Thank you so much. I could never do this on my own. And that, it just reminded me how important it is. And the work that we do can be really hard. Accommodations can be very meaningful and still be challenging at the same time. And just starting the conversation to strangers, right? I don't even work with them. They were so thankful. And so I'm grateful that those of you who joined have done so, and you could have chosen to be anywhere else and you came here. And I'm excited that you care enough to learn and start the conversation at your places of work, and make a difference so that your employees are able to, be seen and build their sense of belonging so they can do their best work on their teams and for your companies, and ultimately on a global scale. So I just wanted to express that and say thank you. Personally, it's very meaningful for me. And I'll pass it back to Mandy now.
Thank you so much, Muna, Sameena, and Muhammad. The panel has been phenomenal. We're getting a lot of questions in. And so I know, Muna, that you hit on some resources. We're going to make sure that everyone who signed up for the panel gets the PowerPoint that we're sending around, and we'll also include links to some resources that our panelists put together, as well as some of the other suggested resources that Muna has highlighted. So let me go to the first question I wanted to pose to the panel is, I know we're talking about within a work setting, but we're also getting some questions on how do individuals said that they work at a large university. They want to know, how do they better support their students? If there's any thoughts that you guys have as far as suggestions.
Anyone want to take that, or should I start? I don't know, Muhammad, aren't you the teacher?
Yeah, but middle school, high school is a little bit different. What they have in common right now, though, is that they're all working from home. And so that does change things a little bit. And so I was thinking about this. I imagine this might actually simplify things for a lot of those college students who move back in with mom and dad. They're not in the dorm environment where I think they will be like maybe more restricted in terms of their access to food and things of that nature. But a lot of the same challenges that employees would have working from home with the distractions at home, we are entering like the most stressful time of year for college students, right? As they're approaching their final exams. And I think just being mindful that the level of stress that they're having, that they're at home, on top of that, they're trying to fast, they're food deprived and water deprived most of the time. I think in a lot of cases, just knowing and being able to empathize with what your students may be going through will help them get through that situation, just so they know they're not struggling in silence, I guess.
Sameena, did you have some other
Yeah,
things?
I just wanted to add that I was drawing back on my experience as a student, and generally because most of us are accustomed to dealing with Ramadan during the school year, going through your classes, studying, even taking exams, we're used to it. One of the big asks that students have that they might be not used to bringing up is Eid. So at the end of Ramadan, when the month is concluded, the day following it is a holiday. It's one of two major holidays in the religion. And this is the big one, because for 30 days you're looking forward to Eid. That's the awareness that schools could do is don't schedule tests on May 24th. And for some fasting Muslims, it might be the 25th or the 22nd. It fluctuates by a day. Generally almost always fluctuates by a day. So some people will celebrate it on the 23rd. Some people celebrate on the 24th. It's a little unpredictable. But one thing that it's hard for students to come to their teachers about is, and it is the end of May, so it is final exam time. That's something to be cognizant, to not schedule final exams on Eid, because that's going to be that's going to put kids in the choice of, do I go celebrate my major religious holiday, or do I have to sit for my exam?
That's a great point, Sameena. Thank you so much for highlighting that. We're getting lots of questions, which I love that everyone is so engaged. And so let me go to the next question. And so there are some questions about kind of the size of the Muslim population within various departments. And how can, given the small size, make everyone aware of Ramadan and the flexibility required from managers? I know you guys have hit on this a little bit during the presentation, but this is a specific question from someone watching as far as recommendations on how to broach this subject with their manager.
Yeah, so I think I spoke about this earlier where, we don't want you to single anyone out. There is a challenge of like, well, how do I know who is Muslim, right? Like, it's the same challenge you deal with if you're trying to identify, well, who are my Black employees? Like, you can't look at a list of names and tell, and you may not even be able to tell in person. And so I do feel like you have to, in the same way that you make all resources available to your employees, like if there's like a monthly newsletter that gets sent out and you make these announcements, like use that mechanism, right? Like I know at my company right now, we do like a weekly company-wide call with our, executive leadership, and we're talking about these things. And last week, our CEO mentioned, hey, Pesach is happening and Easter is happening, and take that into account, right? And so like, how do you make those regular announcements where you're sharing information broadly in the same way you would for everything else? At my company, that is the culture. If it's something that you're not doing for all groups, it's I don't know, what were we talking about with the accommodations, Mandy? What was, you were saying something about making it available to like all groups equally. I want to make sure I say that properly.
Reasonable accommodations, that people have the freedom to practice their religion. And so there has to be accommodations made for that. And so I know we've hit on it a lot as far as, not singling out one religion or another, and I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole into legal issues, but freedom to practice your religion is something that is, something that's within our Constitution, and everyone has the right to do. So we want to make sure that our workplaces are inclusive, like you said, Muna, where people can be their true and authentic self, and we're creating an environment where everyone feels like they can be their, they don't have to hide anything about their identity. And if workplaces, we should think in broad terms of how do we create that environment where not only do, like you said, Muna, people feel comfortable bringing up these issues, but how do we ensure that we're not making rigid rules or policies that really are not needed and that are hampering people from practicing their religion when their work won't really be affected by it. So I'm going to go, we're getting a lot of questions again, which is great. A lot of the questions are kind of, I don't want to say repeating, but kind of going into more detail of how do I bring this up. So I do want to say, again, to the D&I managers on the phone, I think it's important to create that environment where people feel free to be their true authentic self, to feel free that they can bring up these issues, because we are getting some responses from individuals saying, I'm in a workplace of 60 people or this number of people, and I don't know how to bring up these subjects so that they're aware of that I am going to be celebrating Ramadan. And so Muna and several of the panelists have hit that. So let me go through and see what other questions we have here.
So, Mandy, I see a question from Mifra in this chat. Do you mind if I read it out and answer it? So here's a question. Due to quarantine, my entire department is having weekly one-on-one Friday webinars. Around 60 people join. I'd like to mention next Friday how Ramadan started and any ideas on how I can approach this. It's my first full-time job. There aren't that many Muslims on the call, and I want to bring it up for awareness, but I'm afraid some may not care. Here's what I'd say. I believe that your manager and your HR have your best interest in heart. And I think that, you know, what I would do is I would start an email and just say, hey, I'm Muslim. This is a special time. Here's Ramadan. And in addition, we do Friday prayers on this time. I wanted to first start by saying like, hey, here's information. But second, you know, is there like, I'm guessing with this that you're hoping to share, but I'm also curious if you want the time changed, right? And so, you know, starting with like, hey, here's information, like what can I do to like help, or how can I help you help change the time, whatever, right? If they pick that time, then they can work through and pick another time for the call, as well as sharing the information. I think if you provide the information and make it easy for them, that would facilitate the conversation. Another piece is to go to your HR and say, hey, can we do, you know, how do we do this? And let the right channels take care of it. It's not necessarily something you have to do on your own or you have to make the announcement. A lot of times people just don't know, right? And so I like to work under the assumption that people are trying to do their best and they're kind and they'll work it out. Now, I will say they may not be able to do it before the next call, right? Like their process to work it out and work through communications, get approval might take time. I also don't know where you work and I don't know what the culture is. They may just shut it down and be like, we don't talk about religion, right? And so those are things that I recommend that you work to build your credibility. It sounds like you're new there, and find a mentor and like work through that, because, you know, there are different ways to broach that conversation. Happy to connect with you offline too.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Muna. So I did want to highlight one other thing. We've gotten some suggestions as well from some organizations. We have here from the American Heart Association, some of the programs and initiatives they've done. They said, as far as going to your point, Muna, about how are we ensuring that the resources, the content we've used have been properly vetted. And so they said they work there with their Muslim employees who have openly identified themselves. And for the last 5 years, they have been working with them to create resources and to vet content as well. So shout out to the American Heart Association for that great practice of creating that environment of inclusion there. So I know that we are close to time. So I want to see if there's any other questions. We have a lot of great questions, and I want to thank our panelists again for the time. This is such an important issue, and I think only, as we all discussed, heightened in awareness given everything that's going on right now with COVID-19 and the additional stress and pressure everyone is under. to have that type of awareness and empathy, and to make sure that we're providing, being that resource for our employees. And so we are, again, going to share this information with everyone that signed up on the to attend the webinar. If you have any additional questions, we're happy to work with you to provide additional resources. Sameena is one of our advisors with Kanarys, and so what we do is work with companies to create inclusive work environments. We use a database approach, and so not only do we have consulting-based services, but also our software that helps companies measure, track, and really move their diversity, equity initiatives forward using our software so that they can optimize their DEI strategy. And so we've also recorded this webinar as well. And so we're getting some questions saying if people are able to get the webinar and share it with others. Yes. So after the presentation today, everyone will receive an email which will have the resources, as well as a recording of this webinar, as well as some of our previous webinars we've done. We have a webinar on Tuesday that we'll also be doing with the head of diversity at CBRE. So we're really excited about that. And we will continue to keep the conversation going. We know during these times, it's really important not to forget about diversity and inclusion. I know every organization is looking at their budgets and trying to think about, how they are going to prioritize initiatives going forward. And it's really important that during these times, we don't ease up on diversity and inclusion. Really, we have to actually put our foot on the pedal. I mean, on the gas on that, to make sure that those initiatives keep going, and that as we continue to think about kind of who's going to be furloughed and different things in that nature, that we make sure that those outcomes are equitable. So again, we're so excited for everyone that joined us today to have these conversations. We're so excited for having our esteemed panelists. Thank you so much, Muna. Thank you, Muhammad. Thank you, Sameena. And we look forward to keeping the conversation going.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Also, this is Anfield. Signing off now.
Thank you.